we're going to dwell deeper into Islam and science and the contributions that were made in the Golden Age. My particular impetus for doing this research started 3 decades ago after reading the Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam by Sir Muhammad Iqbal in particular. The literature about Islam and science was particularly of high interest in my grandfather's library as well as my father's library. Professor Safadin had written multiple books about history, in particular the Asian subcontinent at large, and also went on towards Central Asia and further down all the way into Levant. The light that had started in terms of science and civilization, both in Samarkand, Bukhara, Khawarizm, Baghdad, and later on into Spain, was rekindled by my grandfather at SP College during his tenure there, and he disseminated the light of sentience and emancipation, both from the humanistic perspective as well as the scientific perspective in Kashmir and the world at large. He received his inspiration from Sir Muhammad Iqbal, including Rumi, the 13th century poet who was a polymath and was himself influenced by Prophet Muhammad, as well as Shams Tabriz, who took him to a transcendental journey towards understanding multiple perspectives using metaphysics as well as a direct spiritual experience of life as a whole and how to uplift the human condition. So let's just go into further detail about Islam and science. It's been 30 years that I've been working on this. My book on this, which is titled Illustrated Encyclopedia of Golden Age of Science and Civilization in Islam. It's taken 30 years to do this research and publish it. This was part of my postgraduate thesis as well at Leeds University. Published this compiled research eventually from multiple papers as part of a worldwide enterprise in this direction, including George Sarton's 3-volume encyclopedia of history of science from Carnegie Institute in US. So this encyclopedia I published in 2015, and it's undergone 3 editions by now. One of the reviews that you can see from the New York Times states on this subject: a golden age that can count among its credits the precursors to modern universities, algebra, names of the stars, and even the notion of science as an empirical inquiry. So this exhibition has also gone live and is available in real time on one of my websites, as I've already mentioned. And there's a whole multimedia associated with this subject that can be looked at from that online medium, from the website that is particularly dedicated to this subject. There are many people who have worked on it. Professor Jamal Khalili from Surrey University, he's done a 3-part BBC documentary on this. Claire Foster, another journalist from BBC, has done a lot of work in trying to get this broadcasted through various channels internationally. And there are multiple other film documentaries within that web page that I've already discussed and shown you, that you can have a look at your own leisure and watch it in real time. This exhibition included, that I'm currently narrating, will also be launched on that same web page, and people can access it in whatever part of the world they are at their own discretion. So on another front, we have George Sarton, History of Science, Carnegie Institute, Washington, US. It's a 5-volume encyclopedia, a canonical encyclopedia in history of science. And one of the passages from there is on the back cover of my encyclopedia over here. And it states, "Thus the language of the Quran became the international vehicle of science and civilization." So there you go. It clearly gets to the root of where all this inspiration came from. Looking at etymological root meanings of the Quranic words, now we can even go further and decipher. One of the encyclopedias on this is Lane's Lexicon, I believe, is one of them. There are many others, but Lane's research was, it went over for 5 decades plus doing this research, and it is available on the internet, and I will put a link up also on this web page for this encyclopedia for Lane, in case you want to go in that direction. So Lane studied the Arabic grammar in all its profundity and connotations, not just the denotation of the words, and his lexicon of Arabic language has completely given us a fresh perspective on the Quranic Arabic, not the cosmopolitan Arabic, which is in many cases very different compared to the authentic Quranic Arabic. But meanings have changed, connotations have changed. So Lane's work is in particular very powerful in that direction. And now we can see that the Quranic emphasis from Ijma, Ijtihad, Tadabbur, Tafakkur, there's a whole chapter on that issue in Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam by Sir Muhammad Iqbal. And I have also put in a whole paper on that subject, which is included in my illustrated encyclopedia on Ijma is mutual consensus via peer-reviewed analysis, which is Ijma, Ijtihad, innovation, the power of doubt, which is very clear from the Quran, doubting everything and focusing on empiricism, Tadabbur, Tafakkur, which is basically looking at the particular, deciphering, using analysis, deduction, induction, and all those processes that build this amazing civilization for nearly 1,000 years. But it also then eventually deciphered and moved into a worldwide impact, where Spain in particular, from Spain it moved all the way to Europe. So the Arabs were in Spain for nearly 700 years, 2 dynasties, Al-Muhawid, Al-Marawids, and from there you had in particular Abbas ibn Firnas line glider, and which I will briefly mention. And also you had Ibn Rushd or Averroes, one of the major philosophers who had a huge impact in the development of critical thinking in the West. From Spain, moving on, around 14th century onwards, 14th, 16th century to 16th century, you had the Renaissance come in because of the dissemination of Islamic science into the West, in particular Spain through Italy and eventually Germany and also the UK, and then it had a huge impact on the Western world, and the process of enlightenment took close to 200 if not 400 years from Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, including Newton, and then eventually René Descartes, who took it in kind of another direction with dualism. So the Quran itself does not see things in duality. It sees everything connected as one, and that is one of the major problems that I have discussed in various other lectures as part of the courses that I teach on empiricism and epistemology, the history of epistemology, and the history of science and empiricism. That's a huge subject on its own. Moving on from here, you also have Robert Briffault in one of the major books which took form into a documentary called The Making of Humanity eventually. So Briffault's book was around 1919, and he has clearly mentioned this over here. So the debt of our science to that of the Arabs does not consist in startling discoveries or revolutionary theories. Science owes a great deal more to the Arab culture. It owes its existence. So that's a very precise and particular statement in terms of how the Western world eventually got influenced from the scientific developments that took place. Actually, as Sir Muhammad Iqbal says in the Reconstruction, as an intellectual warfare with the Greeks. So simply say that this was courtesy of the Greeks is rather doing a lot of injustice to it, as some of the Orientalists have mentioned that. And the Greeks were at large generally philosophers. They had some impact on Farabi, Razi, Ibn Rushd, including Ibn Sina and others, but the impact was in the sense as actually a challenge to take the baton and pass it further, and move from just simple thought experiments and critical thinking and apply it in the real world in chemistry, physics, biology, astronomy, surgery, medicine, so on and so forth. So let's just go straight into it and see how this thought process developed further. So some of the messages in popular news media on this subject again. The story of the great leap in scientific knowledge that took place in the Islamic world. A golden age that can count among its credits the precursors to modern universities, algebra, the names of the stars, and even the notion of science as an empirical inquiry. That's New York Times. And then eventually you got National Geographic. The growth of Islam in the 7th century sparked a golden age of scientific discovery. So this is in the academic world, it's getting much more well known, but it's not getting enough traction in the daily lives of how we understand the Quran and its glorious impact in uplifting the human condition via empirical attitude towards science and practically demonstrated by the Muslim scientists. So it was not just Muslim scientists, that they actually made it a cosmopolitan enterprise and invited people from all over the world who studied under them. And one of the case in point is Moses Maimonides, who was again a polymath in Spain. He was a professor of Arabic, including jurisprudence and philosophy, including metaphysics. Moses Maimonides was from the Jewish faith, but the way they looked at this whole thing was not compartmental faiths going about their own individual orthodox perspective, but it was based on the practical implication as human beings and how to lift mankind up as a collective whole, and not having those icons of separation there. So it was collective. It was that's how Islam eventually spread this into the Western world by translations that especially took place in Spain, including Italy, and so on and so forth. So we've already gone through this template and in the introductory part. A couple of things that I didn't mention in the brief introductory part is there was a huge emphasis also on renewable energies. There were about 5,000 of these water wheels in Syria, and you can even see one of these images over here showing the detailed structure of the eye. And let's go a little bit more into it and have a look at it. So you have over here algorithms coming in from Muhammad bin Musa al-Khwarizmi's book, and his name itself is denoting the idea of what we now call algorithms, and they are direct translation from his name, Khwarizmi. And he even calculated the circumference of the planet to a close approximation of probably was missing around 20-25 kilometers of the nearly 40,070 kilometer in circumference. He missed it by just a small mark of 25 to 20 kilometers, using various equipments and astrolabes and quadrants and sextants that he had devised. So this is again one of the pictures of showing the eyes and the retina and the lens and optic chiasma, and how the nerves eventually go to different parts of the hemisphere, and how visual perception is that, again, work done by Al-Hasan ibn al-Haytham, currently known as the father of modern experimental physics and optics in particular. Newton, in majority case, translated his works, including Chuzini, his student, about the laws of gravity that you find in Principia Mathematica of Newton. The focus again on the particular to uplift the human condition in a sustainable way is huge within Islam, and I will explain that when I come to the engineering part. These are the tools by Abu Qasim al-Zahrawi in surgery, including forceps. He had already devised not just tools for surgery, but forceps for delivery of babies in case the normal parturition didn't work. This is Nasiruddin Tusi. You can see the globe is already well represented, and you can see them using various astronomical equipments. The double circulation by Ibn Nafis as opposed to Galen's single circulation, also very well defined in his books, including blood transfusion is very well described by Ibn Nafis. Some of the pictures from Nafis's books, spherical astrolabes. This gentleman in particular, Zhang He, as it's pronounced correctly in Chinese, he was one of the admirals in the Chinese Navy and was commissioned by the Emperor of China to go around the whole world, and he was a Muslim, and he went and he was highly well learned in terms of the sciences that Islam had already introduced even in China, as part of the larger Islamic dissemination of Islamic science. And he actually disseminated Islam and science to all the known world of his time as well. And this, I believe, in Nanjing in China, that's where he's currently buried. So this is why I've already discussed these water wheels to irrigate nearly other than water wheels, we had windmills also in Syria to power irrigation systems. So let's just go directly into some more illustrations from the book. That's a huge astronomical spherical astrolabe, actually studying not just the Earth but also navigation eventually. And this, I believe, was in somewhere in either Baghdad or Samarkand, Bukhara, somewhere. Okay, we begin with Abbas ibn Farnas. So his name, eventually in Latin, turned out to be was reiterated as Arman Farman. And Smith et al., one of the aviation experts from the RAF, Royal Air Force in UK, has a huge description of him in his book. And there are at least 2 craters by his name on Moon that NASA has named based on his name. And he didn't only just influence eventually later on Leonardo da Vinci, but many others. Some of these diagrams are from da Vinci, which were taken from also Abbas ibn Farnas's books on aviation, including meteorology. He was also a weather scientist. Dies in his 5th attempt, and despite the fact the orthodoxy was against flight at that time, but he stuck, and he was the first person to fly nearly a millennia before the Wright brothers. So we're looking at around 9th century here in Spain. On the other side, you have in aviation and rocket technology, the Chalabi brothers. They created a rocket propelled device, in which they actually created and launched themselves using this rocket over the Galata, which was quite an effort. quite a jump from the old world perspective. So the first Rocketeers, and then you can see then their literature and their experiments were later reconducted in Russia, and then you can see the space age actually kicking off in Russia with Yuri Gagarin and the Sputnik, which was also launched much later on. So this is around 17th century on, 1632 to be precise, is when the Chalabi brothers tried the first attempt to fly using a rocket-propelled device. So first university over here you have is by Fatima al-Fihri. We're looking at as far as 9th century, more than a millennia, and is referenced in the Guinness Book as the first university in the world in Morocco. So this is in Fez itself, and it still stands there, and there's a Google Doodle done on this depiction to honor her as well. And her parents were very wealthy, but she spent all the money after her parents passed away into building this university, Fatima Fihri University. And it's also called the Kawarain University in Fez. So Ibn Khaldun, another very well-known person who established the field of scientific history in his book Muqaddimah. It's been translated by Frank Rosenthal into various volumes, I believe 5 if I'm correct. If I may just quickly read very briefly from the text itself, as mentioned by Frank Rosenthal. So Rosenthal says the following about Ibn Khaldun. History is a science. History has a content and the historian should account for it. The historian should account for the elements that gather to make the human history. He should work according to the laws of history. History is a philosophical science. History is composed of news about the days, states, and the previous centuries. It is a theory, an analysis and justification about the creatures and their principles, and a science of how the incidents happen and their reasons. Myths have nothing to do with history and should be refuted. So this is directly taken from, these are directly taken from Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah. To build strong historical records, the historian should rely on necessary rules for the truth comparison, which is empirically peer-reviewed analysis, as we may call it. And again, Rosenthal mentions this. Ibn Khaldun is recognized as a pioneer of empirical evidence-based history. Frank Rosenthal writes the following about Muqaddimah. It can be regarded as the earliest attempt made by any historian to discover a pattern in the changes that occur in man's political and social organization. Rational in its approach, analytical in its method, encyclopedic in detail, it represents an almost complete departure from the traditional historiography, disregarding conventional concepts and cliches, and seeking, beyond the mere chronicle of events, an explanation and hence a philosophy of history. So there is another whole section in this manuscript taken out from the Muqaddama, manuscript copy of Ibn Khaldun's Al-Muqaddama, with a diagram of the cycle of justice, in which he shows how civilizations rise and fall in case they don't focus on the idea of justice, which is directly taken from the Quranic perspective. So moving on from Khaldun, again, there's a Google Doodle done on his honor, and it is in the encyclopedia itself. We're looking at around 13th, 14th century, around, well, we can call it even just around the brink of the 15th century. So education, you can see Beit al-Hikmah, House of Wisdom, and also Dar al-Adab, that was opened by in Baghdad by Khalid Harun Rashid and his wife Zubayda's son included. And this is 8th century, just a few centuries after Muhammad. You got this huge focus on knowledge from a cosmopolitan point of view, and throughout the world the knowledge was collected and was looked through the light of the Quran and improved upon for the upliftment of the human condition, including focus on empirical methodology and getting rid of superstition. Talking about graduation ceremonies in these universities that the early Muslim scientists had enterprised, which were state-funded, and education was given freely. Whoever wanted to seek it, it was part of the necessity that the Muslims of those times saw. Let's have a look at this by Professor Glenn Cooper, Professor of History, Brigham Young University in US. The concept of receiving a degree comes from Islam and is associated with getting a degree from a set curriculum. So again, the whole graduation ceremony is associated with these issuing these degrees to based on set curriculum and having a particular discipline associated with that. But transdisciplinary, not just simply focusing on the particular. There was a responsible attitude towards science and empiricism and deduction, and with, as they say, with knowledge comes power, and with power comes responsibility. Obviously, that's one of my focuses in my lectures and my courses that I teach. So again, that's my grandfather there, Professor Safuddin, wearing a graduation robe at SP College, and was a patron of sciences, history, which he was himself teaching. He was a professor of history, and he had studied law as well. It was humanities was one of his main subjects that he used to teach, but he was definitely had uplifted the human condition even during his time in the earlier half of the 20th century and middle part of the 20th century, I would say, and instituted various sports enterprises as well, because he was a sportsman of high rapport as well, being a football player, and he promoted various other sports and healthy competitions and camaraderie as part of sports activities, not just for competitive reasons. He had a different perspective on sports. So quickly, let's have a look at this, what's mentioned. The graduation ceremony is an Islamic tradition as a vindication of knowledge that licenses one to teach and practice what one has learned at a university. The Quran used to be placed on the graduate's head to swear an oath. That's what you see with the cap. The graduation cap has a kind of a place for that to position the Quran. The presence of the flat square holder on the graduation cap as a place to hold the Quran served as a physical placeholder on the graduation cap. The long flowing Arabic Andalusian robes worn in the graduation ceremonies still persist. Malala, again, Malala Yousafzai, very well known in a current era to one of the proponents of education, in particular for girls. She was very brave to do that against all the orthodoxy and the dogma that was going on, and at her own peril in many cases. Also was the receiver of the Nobel Prize as well. Has written multiple books and is a brave figure in terms of uplifting the human condition, in particular for women's education worldwide. Paper industry again. So the invention of paper is historically attributed to Chinese, and it spread to the Arabs via the Silk Route. There you go, the Chinese illustration of how to make paper, and then you have in 1795 a paper making industry was established in Baghdad. There's the reference for it, and everything in this encyclopedia is completely peer-reviewed in references, not just the illustrations, but there's close to, I believe, 350 odd references at the back of the encyclopedia. Scientific encyclopedias was pretty popular among the Muslim scientists. Ikhwan Safa in particular, well known for as an encyclopedist institution, Brotherhood of Purity as they mentioned. They had very beautifully illustrated encyclopedias in every branch of science and humanities. Hospitals became very popular in 977, over almost a millennia, more than a millennia ago. You got this hospital in Baghdad in particular employed 24 physicians conducting surgery and for eye disorders and various others. And it was not left to some occult orthodoxy. It was a very sophisticated hospital where there was a whole department for pharmacology and biochemistry and herbology, but they were not synthetically created, they were naturally created. We'll be talking more about medicine later. This one is very popular, this hospital, and the institution of medical hospitals was set, including wards for different ailments and patients who needed attention. Ibn Nafis, as I already mentioned earlier on, challenged Galen and did the dissections, eventually found out what is known as the double circulation, pulmonary and systemic, pulmonary between the lungs and the heart, and systemic between the heart and the rest of the body. Arteries, veins were all clearly illustrated in his book, including how to conduct blood transfusions. They were referred to William Harvey for a while in the medieval world, and eventually the Royal Society in UK discovered that it was not William Harvey, it was Ibn Nafis, and then it was reattributed back to Ibn Nafis, the idea of double circulation, including blood transfusion. Razi, the physician, and he was in particular focused on the medical application of disease prevention, disease control, in particular pandemics and vaccination, but using synthetically created medicine, organically created medicine, not synthetically created medicine. And German measles and various other diseases were also, the vaccination for that was already devised by. Also, the precursors to the periodic table were mentioned in his book. Liber Contentus was the Latin translation of Al-Hawl. You can see anatomical structure of the body, clearly labeled the different organs. Abul Qasim al-Zahrawi, Spain. You can see various kind of surgical devices for incision and cutting, and forceps included, and in particular catgut surgery, which is katgut in Arabic. Does not mean catgut, but it's threads taken from made from the guts of a sheep, which have the least anti-rejection properties in human beings, and it's still the same procedure. We still call it katgut, and it is attributed to Zahrawi, and was one of the first surgeons that we historically we understand as we understand modern surgery, and he even conducted cesareans, and basically using the catgut technique. Using the catgut method, basically avoided all the, healed the patient, basically. So, one of the giants again here in the medical sciences, we have Avicenna, as we call him in Latin. Avicenna, Ibn Sina is his actual name, Muslim scientist from Persia, and we're looking at around 10th century, 11th century. He wrote two encyclopedias on medicine, Kanun fi al-Tib and Kitab al-Shafi. Kanun fi al-Tib is the canon of medicine, and Kitab al-Shafi is the book of healing. So he is designated as the father of modern experimental medicine. Point to be noted is that Hippocrates is father of Greek medicine, but this gentleman, Ibn Sina, is the father of modern experimental medicine. So this was taught and translated eventually and taught in Europe until the 17th century. And subjects ranging from anatomy, gynecology, child health, so on and so forth, including surgical methodology and transfusion. To use fistulas for various procedures to heal the patient. So again, he had memorized it was kind of a child prodigy. By the age of 10, he had memorized the Quran, but not just for some theoretical reason or tradition, but he learned from the Quran and studied medicine by the age of 13, and by the age of 16 began practicing medicine, and by the age of 18 he was an expert in medicine, and later on became the chief surgeon of the state as well. Ibn Zor, another surgeon, using various herbal remedies and advanced techniques to develop healing procedures. biologist. We have already discussed a little bit about Al-Jahiz. He was the author of an encyclopedia on biology called the Book of Animals, Kitab al-Haywanat. Looking at 9th century around here in Morocco. He's the actual father of modern evolutionary biology based on natural selection and adaptation. He discusses gaps in evolution, but say he looks at the Quran and finds that there is enough evidence in the Quran to support evolution, but there is not enough evidence from nature itself to show the jumps in evolution. And basically he simply explains those gaps by a creative design or intelligent design, which is basically the creator amplifies the DNA and induces changes that are leading to the diversity of life on Earth eventually, with millions of species that we currently have. And he was also focused on looking at the world as an interconnect and not damaging it from a sustainability point of view, using the language of science and biology that he had learned, how intricate it is. And he basically calls the entire life on Earth as web of interdisciplinaries, and intricacies was the other word. And his book is eventually read by Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, who was a medical scientist and a surgeon general to royalty in UK. And Darwin basically copies his grandfather's book, which is Zoonomia, and does not make any reference to Al-Jahiz. And apparently there's a German biologist also who had mentioned Al-Jahiz in his works, but he did not get enough rapport because he didn't publish fast enough. I have a better understanding of evolution further on from the Western perspective from Alfred Russel Wallace, who was a contemporary of Darwin, but they published together, but Darwin's work gained more rapport. Although Alfred Russel Wallace used the word intelligent design in his books to explain evolution, and his evidence was much more detailed than Darwin. Darwin got the media attention because of Francis Galton, his cousin, who was a white supremacist, and he was instituting the idea of imperialism via survival of the fittest, and looking down on the what he called primitive civilizations, that the white supremacists and the idea of the British Empire taking over the rest of the world and teaching them more sophisticated methods. That was the redundant idea from Darwin, and Darwin was himself a racist in multiple ways. He has actually explained this in his own literature as the white man being superior, which is ridiculous, because Darwin was a flunk at school and eventually went on to study divinity, and even I'm not sure whether he even finished his degree, because he was an aristocrat. He didn't have to really spend too much time with the academic channel, because he had already gained high reputation from his orthodox view of evolution. I lecture on this. I have a lot of papers published in this area, especially in the field of intelligent design, not creationism, which is a totally different thing. There's the symbolisms there in creationism, and conflicting reductionist ideas. But we are looking at the science over here. You can look at Dr. Michael Behe, who's a biochemist, and he talks about irreducible complexity and so on and so forth, and Dr. Meyer, and they are both well-established scientists here in US, and I do constantly try to share these things with the new light on evolution from intelligent design perspective, but the orthodoxy in the reductionist perspective of survival of the fittest, and that kind of dogma, which actually plays a very small minor role in evolution, does not cater to the intelligent design and the fine-tuning of the universe, and eventually that it's all interconnected and we are part of it, and if we don't understand this, we're going to destroy it if we have the orthodox redundant reductionist perspective on it. So this is in Jahiz's work, and his book is in the capacity of Royal Society in UK. And, I've had a look at the original because I was in my undergrad in biology at Leeds University working on this, and my prof, Professor Ray McNeill Alexander, was the father of modern biomechanics, a very well-established scientist, who passed away recently, about 4 or 5 years ago, implored me to do this research, and when I published my thesis in this research, was eventually highly commended it and said that he had learned something new, and he had kind of intuitively thought about it, but the fact that he passed the baton to me, and I highly venerate him and respect him to have insisted that I conducted this research. So he was the head of the biology department at Leeds University as well, where I studied under him. Later on, went to do my graduation in history of science, in particular experimental science. Botanist Al-Baja, and again, well, he was a polymath, but however focused on botany. Zubaydah, the wife of Harun Rashid, 9th century, she was an engineer and stateswoman, one of the earliest women scientists, and she constructed the irrigational canal between the Euphrates and Tigris, and then eventually all the way to Dar al-Zubaydah, it's called. It's even visible from space, and connected it to Medina to provide water for irrigation almost throughout the Arabian Peninsula. But not only that, she was a historian as well, not just an engineer and scientist and an architect. She actually resuscitated Alexandria after it was destroyed by the Crusades, and reconstructed Alexandria in the northern part of Egypt, and also her son, including they were patron of scientific enterprise, and as I mentioned earlier, set up the Dar al-Adab and Dar al-Hikmah universities that were the most prominent universities throughout the world of her time, 9th century. And moving on from there, she also instituted within the academics the 1001 nights, as it later became very popular. And that was part of the high culture, and including public stages for dramas to basically include the arts and humanities, and expression for the arts and humanities where drama. 1001 Nights in particular is still very popular throughout the world, and its influence on Western literature is very well known. Al-Jahiz you see over here with the invention of various mechanical devices. The book that he wrote is Kitab al-Tirirat al-Handisa, which is called the Book of Ingenious Mechanical Devices. And, the crankshaft is also first described by him for gears and basically propulsion movement of circular movement and turning. He also demonstrated steam power and combustion, and how you can turn the movement of the pistons using the crank and then an axle to move that movement, to move a wheel, to drive various forms of technologically very superior engineering devices. But he was not given the license to elaborate on this, because rightly so, because of the fumes, carbon dioxide fumes coming out of the steam engine. And Professor Donnelly Hill had done an exhibition a long time back at Science Museum in London, and I visited that and read his book also on Al-Jaziri. His works are known as the Automata in Latin, but not just he was quite not only interested in mechanisms in terms of creating devices to uplift the human condition, but he made a musical boat and a water castle clock and so on and so forth, many other types of technology. But much of his technology was used in agriculture, for water wheels and so on and so forth, to uplift the human condition. So he's the father of modern mechanical engineering. There you have it. Tani, astronomer, you can see him, one of the craters on Moon. NASA has named based on his name. So he turns the old world view towards from the geocentric to heliocentric, amongst others, during his time. And you can see his books illustrating all that, the spherical structure of the Earth, the Moon, and various other celestial bodies. Astronomical tables are mentioned by him, so on and so forth. In Star Trek series, there's a mention of him as well. USS Al-Batani starship. So we're looking at around 10th century, 9th, 10th century. Maryam al-Astalabi, again, she was into mathematics, but she applied mathematics into building spherical astrolabes. This I usually use this illustration as part of the motif for my exhibition of this subject. Yeah, coming back to her, and she used, again, very wealthy lady, and very high acumen in terms of mathematics, but she took the next step towards spherical astrolabes, and that's what she's holding over here in her hand, one of the first spherical astrolabes that were made. So huge jumps in astronomy.